Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever live Set Lusting Bruce um, episode podcast. This is new to me. I've never done it before. So, gonna see what happens. I've invited people to join me. We're working through the different kinks. So, we're going to talk about Bruce's new album. And I'm hoping I get a few people. So if you are here, looks like James just joined us. James, can you hear me?
I can indeed, Jesse.
Well, very nice. It is glad you're the first to join us. As I've been telling everyone, I've never done this before, so this will be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting for the people to join us, what's your first thoughts about the album? Well, first off, tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is James, and I live in Dundee in Scotland.
Very nice. And so, initial thoughts on the album?
My initial thoughts are, well, probably as expected from the early tracks that were released, is that it's very much a theme album. I really like it. I really like Bruce's tone. I really like his kind of overall approach to the whole thing. It's almost a concept album.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hang on that. E Street Shuffle just joined us. Can you hear us?
I can. How you doing, Jesse?
Good. Give us your name and where you're from.
Hey, everybody. My name's Ken Rosen. I am originally from Philly. Been in Seattle, Washington for the last 20 years or so.
Very nice. So I don't know if you heard what James said.
I did not. I just showed up as you caught me.
All right. So James, repeat what you said, and then I want to hear what you think.
I was saying that basically it strikes me that it's almost a concept album. It's almost like a Western concept album.
Yeah.
And I really like that it's a very mellow Bruce. You know, he's quite restrained at times. It's powerful, but he's not really lashing out there. He's keeping it on the a steady level.
It's definitely contemplative.
Yeah,
that's kind of the word that kind of occurred to me when I heard it.
I like that word a lot. Someone was kind enough to give it to me a little bit early through Dropbox, and I'm glad because my copy showed up at work, but I don't have a CD drive. On my laptop.
That must be very frustrating.
Yeah. So luckily I had already heard it. And so, and then the CD I ordered from Backstreets hasn't shown up yet. But I've got to hear it. I loaded the CD into my car. I've been listening to it. Apologize to all the podcasts I usually listen to. I'm going to be really delayed on my podcast for a while. And what I found as I was listening yesterday, I put my headset on. I was playing the music while working, and everyone kept going, "Are you on a phone call?" No, I'm good. I'm good. It's a very, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's a wonderful background album. It's a very, it is, there's a couple of great songs that I could see would be really fun in concert. But in a lot of ways, this is just kind of a listen to it, as you're sitting there, in the dark, just kind of thinking of things. If you're alone in the car,
that's what I was thinking.
Just
driving album.
Yeah, just as you listen to it, kind of give you company.
Mm-hmm. It really it creates a mood very well, I think.
Yeah,
it really does. Yeah,
I find that it's the first thing that went to my head as I heard the album is it made my ears happy. It's actually the nicest sounding album, like from a production point of view.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of the last few albums kind of had a very harsh, loud sound to it, and this is just so pleasant.
It's the production job they've done on it is really good, and particularly with because he's got the live orchestra stuff. That could very easily just overwhelm it, and it doesn't. It's kept very clear and kind of enhances it rather than just overpowering it.
Yeah,
I totally agree. It is such a smooth sounding album,
Yeah.
and it's so well done. And you're sitting there going, "Oh, this is great." I love the different, as you talked about, the orchestra. His voice is very strong.
Yeah,
His voice is amazing. It is breathtaking at times. I was like, holy cow. It wasn't just that I didn't know he could sing like that anymore. I didn't know he could sing like that at all at times.
And I found myself, and this is kind of backwards, but I was thinking, wow, I wish Glenn Campbell was still alive
Yeah.
to hear him cover a couple of these songs.
Yeah.
Because it's so, and Hello Sunshine made me immediately think of Glenn Campbell and the Jimmy Webb songs. And a lot of them, it is just this beautiful, I think if this came out in a different era, it would do very well on pop radio.
Mhm.
We're not in that level now, but like in the, exactly what he's talking about in the 70s. And, when this is where you're thinking of late 60s, 70s, several of these songs would be really well played on both country stations and pop stations.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's paid homage, I think, to some of those artists that influenced him without just doing a rip-off, which, I think just demonstrates, his power as a songwriter that can take influences and then make something of them. Because that's not easy to do, I don't think.
No, and there's a lot of discussion that Little Steven and other people said that if Bruce had wanted to be a pop, like in the Brill Building back in the day, or something where he just wanted to write pop songs, he could.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys heard, but Rock in the Suburbs podcast did a week of Bruce this past week in honor of the new album coming out.
Mm-hmm.
They did Monday through Friday of Bruce, and they did a different album. They did Born to Run. They did the 5 albums in a row. They said that they made the argument that they don't know if another artist had 5 such strong albums in a row to go from Born to Run to Born in the USA.
Yeah.
And they talked about, the story that, Dancing in the Dark, like, okay, you need a more of a radio friendly single. And he goes, writes it and comes back and goes, what, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, and he did that right from the beginning. I mean, that when he was doing Greetings, that's what they said. We don't hear a single. And he went away and wrote Blinded by the Light.
Absolutely.
It's one of those, I remember, I think it was on the documentary for The River, where they were talking to Stevie, and Stevie said he's always got like 12 singles that he can just produce. And it's incredibly annoying for guys who can't do that, who labor away at a song for days and days and days. And Bruce is just like snaps his fingers and there you go.
He's got this great knack and he always has, for being able to write amazing, like hooky pop songs, but he's always had something to say at the same time, right? And the something to say always trumped just the pure pop pleasure, I want to say fluff, but not in a bad way, in a negative way, like just in a fun way. Like I think it's his outlet and he likes that, but like when you're an artist, I think you also want to say something, right? And I think that's always what sort of kept, he had this sort of phantom career kind of going under the surface. If you actually trace all the stuff that came out in tracks, and it's still probably in the vault.
And I suspect actually it's maybe John Landau and Stevie and other guys who have had almost pressured him along the way to keep some of that lighter stuff in there and say, this is going to be really popular. Maybe it doesn't give the greatest message that you're really wanting to get out there, but it will be successful.
Well, but sometimes if you look at even his later stuff and you really go back and listen to it, there's some darker, more serious themes that are there underneath it, right? And and sometimes it actually adds to the album as well when you go back. I mean, even like we said, like Dancing in the Dark, if you actually think about it, that's kind of a it's kind of a serious song. Yeah.
And I think Jesse, you said this when we spoke, and you were talking about how he did that on Broadway, and it really brought a whole other dimension to that song. Of where it fit in the set list. And it was the context that it was set in made it a very different thing.
Yeah, it did. And as I've shared, and now that we've all seen it, you're like, that's a weird. But then when he talks about sometimes you just got to dance like his mom, and then they play that, and going right into Land of Hope and Dreams is just a really strong 1-2 punch.
Yeah. Although I have to say, well, we're going to start drifting, but
that's okay. So I've invited the world to join us, and I have blocked out an hour of family time. I told people I'm going to be talking at least for an hour. My lovely wife sent me to McDonald's to get us breakfast this morning. That's why I keep turning off my mic so you guys don't watch me, chomping on a hash brown. And so we got all the time. We can go wherever we want.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, when I saw Broadway the first time, it was literally like the first night of previews. And at the time, he actually had no context provided for Dancing in the Dark. Like, he didn't have that link about his mom in there, and it just sort of came at that point. Yeah. And I remember thinking, like, this is really odd. Like, it's the one point of the show that, like, I don't know why, like, it felt like he just sort of threw it in there gratuitously, and I left thinking, like, okay, it was an awesome show, except for, like, Dancing in the Dark. I don't know why it was there. And then, I went back a year later and saw it, and he had, of course, I think he'd fleshed out the story and figured out how to have that add resonance to it. And then it had a completely different effect on me, because I'm like, okay, now I feel and see the context that I didn't before.
Yeah, I think so. Another thing, I'm curious, just because that's how my brain works. I wonder when he recorded this. And where was his?
I was actually wondering, because I was wondering, you were saying his voice sounds really good, and I was wondering whether Broadway had an influence on that, because he wasn't shouting his lungs out every night for a year. He could take his time and really work on it.
A few minutes ago, I went back and I dug up, because I was obsessing over this. It was in my head. And I remember that back in 2014, just after the High Hopes tour finished, you're going to get insight into the way my brain works on all this little random trivia theft stuff.
That's perfect.
That Patty shared an Instagram post of Bruce working on new music. And it was she called it, I assumed it was a song title called The Last Churro. And it had the orchestra. I mean, he was basically like conducting the orchestra and recording the string parts. Right. So I'm like, oh, I wonder if any of that ended up on the new album. And I just went back like minutes before we got on this to go and listen to it. And it wasn't, I mean, I couldn't recognize it from the album, but it had the same lush sound to it. And I'm wondering if, like, he came off the High Hopes tour and was actually just recording that music, because I'm sure I feel like he wouldn't have brought all those musicians together for like a random outtake. But it also makes me think, like, there's more.
Yeah. Well, there always is, isn't there?
It's not all.
There's always is. Well said. Because like I was thinking, first off, I'm greedy. I would love a small tour as long as it's somewhere close enough that I could go to kind of see this. Yeah, Brian Wilson, when he first started touring, I was lucky enough he did Pet Sounds live, and he would use the local orchestra. Like when he was here in Dallas, he had part of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra playing all the parts of Pet Sounds. And I just could picture Bruce at Bass Hall or one of these, with this lush orchestra, singing some of these songs. Maybe a second Broadway gig with a full orchestra would be kind of cool.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, he does even the smaller albums. He's tended to tour. I mean, he obviously didn't tour High Hopes particularly, did he? But I mean, he's tended to tour. He's tended to tour pretty much everything.
Yeah,
so
maybe. My theory is he's sticking close to home because of his mom.
Yeah.
And I also think, based on the interview he had with the Italian paper, he's finishing up material for the band, and they're going to plan to record maybe later this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and he's talked about, 2020, a full tour. I tell you another thing I wanted to get you guys' opinion on. It's 2019, and this could be the summer of the E Street Band.
It kind of is.
I mean, Little Steven new album, Neil's a new album. There's, Gary has talked about he's going to release a new album.
Gary's got something coming.
Yeah, Jake, a new album. Max is, I got to tell you, on a side note, talk about rambling. Someone posted on Facebook the Austin Statesman that Max Weinberg was going to perform. And I went, okay, Linda, we're going to Austin. Can we afford it? No, I don't care. There's no way I'm not going to this. And then it was not Austin, Texas. And I was just, so yeah, that because I would love to do that. So yeah, this, and now you've got a new Bruce album. What I love is how the guys seem to be all supporting each other, which you think they would. I mean, they love each other. They do think of themselves as brothers. And I remember little Steven on Twitter last year, someone was complaining that, oh, when are we going to get an E Street Band tour? And little Steven says, no, this is the time for you to enjoy Niels. This is time for you to enjoy me. We'll get back together. Don't worry. But right now, enjoy what you have. And
I would do that if they would just all come to Seattle. None of them are coming except for Max.
Exactly.
And I'll be there for Max.
Oh, that's
I'm
cool.
like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I know it is Seattle tough as Dallas, but let's not even talk about Scotland. Poor James.
Well, yeah, he does. To be fair, he does hit us up usually once each tour. We get, but the difficulty is we tend to try and travel because he plays in Glasgow at the football ground there, and it's not, the sound isn't great, so we tend to avoid that if we can. Yeah.
So as we've kind of talked about initial thoughts, any tracks that have stood out to you?
Oh yeah, definitely. So the singles that were released, I love them all. Tucson Train hooked me instantly, but when I got the album and listened to it, the one that like instantly worked its way into my heart, like it's actually I think one of my top songs from his entire catalog now, is Drive Fast, the Stuntman.
Yeah, it's a great track.
It is a good track.
It struck me as, like he's had a whole series of these like story songs before, right? Like The Hitter and The Wrestler, and I don't know, maybe it's the theme of the occupation. I don't know. I just popped into my head right now. Actually, I noticed that. But he's got these darker sort of story songs, these narratives, but that have sort of been lighter on the melody and also more of the universal resonance. And then he's got like these relationship songs, right? These love songs that you can sort of gravitate to, and he kind of fused them together. And there's actually like a story and a narrative that's very specific about this character, and yet the whole theme of it that works in a specific level about him and his job, and just sort of the theme about just go for it, right? Just like throw your whole heart into it and don't worry. And I just love it. Like, and musically, I think it's more distinct, I think, than a lot of the other tracks on the album. And lyrically, it's wonderful. It's the high point.
Absolutely. It was the music that grabbed me first, I've got to say, because it moves away from that sort of standard Bruce approach, if you like, where, don't get me wrong, the guy's a musical genius, but he takes quite a traditional approach, I suppose, to sort of music and arrangements and stuff.
You can hear references to other songs and a lot of that.
But Drive Fast, he throws in some chord changes and key changes and stuff that you're really not expecting. Yeah. And he strikes off on a slight tangent, and it really makes it much interesting and quite a cleverly crafted song, I think.
I totally agree. It was the one song I listened to, and I'm like, I don't hear anything but this song.
Yeah,
and it feels distinctly his.
The other one that grabs me is Western Stars as well. I've got to say, the title track is a really strong song.
Totally agree. Yeah, that's.
But again, he's playing within himself. You know what I mean? He never really lets go and sort of, strikes up the band and heads out there. He's very contained. He's keeping it all inside and being very controlled about how he kind of projects what it is he's doing. It's a very what did you say? Contemplative.
Contemplative.
I say
Yeah, that's
thank you is a
actually
great word.
Song that was in my head actually when I was saying it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like both of those. When you throw in those two, The Hitchhiker, this is almost like a collection of short stories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Western Tales by Bruce Springsteen. And they're, the wrestler has a feeling of weariness.
Yes.
And of age. And I think these songs have that same weariness, but not necessarily in a bad way.
Weary but not resigned.
Yes. Oh, perfect. Because I just turned 60, and I realize in the grand scope of things, that's nowadays that's not old. When you're 20, 60 seems very old. When you're 45 or 50, 60 doesn't seem old at all. But you do have a sense of there is less road in front of you than there is behind you. It's not a depressing thought. It's just that's the reality. And there was a little bit of that in these songs, and that, I've had a long life. I'm still forward to what life's going to give me. They're very good story songs. And Harry Chapin is one of my other favorite musicians, and that's Harry made a living off story songs. And so I think this is a really nice change of pace, and a lot of people have talked about this, but I want you to share, when you first heard this and you hear it, expand on what people say. This is not like anything Bruce has done before.
Well, I feel like almost everything is unlike anything he's ever done before, in a way. That's kind of what is fascinating and maddening sometimes about his stuff, right? You mentioned hitchhiking rather. When I first heard that song, it felt to me like an overture. Like it was setting out the theme for the record, because it wasn't that things happened in it. It was sort of just introducing a series of characters through these vignettes from the view of a character, right? And then the record just sort of opens up and starts to tell these stories. And I've seen all these descriptors of it as a cinematic record, and I always thought of it as like cinematic the way like Thunder Road is cinematic, right? With this just like screenplay type, imagery. But it is different. It almost is like, when I listen to the album, it feels like the soundtrack of a movie that was never made, or movies that were made. It feels so like I could almost see the action when I listen to some of the songs. It sounds so much like not just songs written for a movie, but the score of a movie. If you actually listen to some of the songs,
Definitely.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think, as you said, everything he does is different. I think Bruce has been very good at not necessarily reinventing himself, but allowing himself to go where he wants to musically, and not feel that he has to stick with an image or a genre. He just kind of, whatever he feels like doing, he does. And take it or leave it. I mean, it reminds me a little bit. The overall thing, I suppose, reminds me a little bit of when Ghost of Tom Joad came out, because that was a real change in tone and in structure and everything. And at the time, a lot of people were kind of, taken aback by that a little bit, and I was. But over time, it's almost settled into its place now.
Yeah.
And every album does that. Devils and Dust was the same, and I think when the Seeger Sessions album came out, people were a bit surprised and were thinking, what the hell has he done here? But now you look back on it, and it's a great addition to his kind of he's got his toolbox of things he can draw on, and it's just adding to that. So this, I think, it'll be interesting to see what he does with these live, definitely. Whether he tries to do them orchestrally, or whether there are a couple in there where you can almost hear them as band versions.
Yeah, I think if you go back, with Nebraska, but now then Atlantic City is now just as realistic as an E Street Band song. When they do it, I think you guys are both really on point. I especially like the idea that the first song, the guy who's the hitchhiker, almost is, you could see if we were doing a television show or a movie that as Rod Sterling type, presenter of the different stories.
Yep.
And there's a joy to that song
There
he's just, I'm just riding, and
I laughed.
Yes.
Literally laughed out loud when the song started because there's no introduction. He's just there,
he's great
singing
in
at the
there.
top of his register. And I burst out laughing because it was so unexpected.
Yeah.
Well, and we get immediately, Bruce is a high falsetto, and the twanginess, and it just, you're in there, and I guess Penn Jillette talks a lot about that. He believed everything that Bob Dylan said in his early about riding the rails and doing all this traveling around the country, and so Gillette said, I did it because I thought that's what my hero was doing. So there is that feeling of this person, because immediately I go, it's dangerous to hitchhike.
That's what my daughter said when she heard it. She
Stop
said,
and
"You
pick
shouldn't
a
hitchhike."
guy, and then why should that guy not worry that he's going to be picked up by someone who's crazy? But okay, let's throw away reality for a moment.
Well, and let's also acknowledge that if we were to assume that Bruce was advocating for everything he sings about, we would have to seriously worry about him after Nebraska.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, go back to the river, on Hungry Heart. Bruce told me to leave my child and life to go. I'm heading to Baltimore.
Jesus Christ! I mean, Bruce just leaves basically in his songs. That's all he's never anywhere for more than about 5 minutes.
Absolutely. I love the idea, and I agree with you. Bruce, and I hate to use the word reinvents himself, but he wants to try new musical things. He wants to do. There is, and I saw a little bit of mostly positive things on Twitter yesterday. It was a very, as we're recording this, for those of you who are listening after the fact on the podcast, it's Saturday morning after the release. I have James and Ken with me. The link is still open. We're hoping other people will join us, but if not, the three of us are having a great time. So yesterday on release day, my Twitter feed was just filled with, people talking about the album, how much they liked it, what they loved. It was number one on whatever chart they do nowadays, so, but someone kind of sent a tweet like, hey, you should appreciate the fact he's already done Born to Run. He's already done Darkness. Let him do what he wants to do. And a couple other replied back, I'm not saying he's got to do Born to Run again. I'm not saying he's got to do Darkness again. What I'm saying is I don't particularly care for this album. And I have the same feeling. I'm not a big fan of the Seeger sessions. Now, when I see the songs done live, there is a joy to them, and I get it. But as far as the album itself, there's 3 or 4 songs I really love, and the rest of them, they're just, I'm not saying they're bad songs, they just don't speak to me. So I think as a fan, you can pick and choose, well, this song doesn't speak to me, or I don't particularly like this song. That doesn't make you a bad fan. It doesn't make that you're not supporting Bruce. Just everyone's taste different.
No,
So
but here's
with
a
that,
fascinating
Wade, what
question,
are you
though.
saying? Okay.
So here's a fascinating question that I was thinking about as you were saying that is if you were brand new to Bruce's music, if you had never heard anything before, and this is the album that you first came across, would you take to it, or are we sort of predisposed to, if not like it, at least give it more consideration or add the context that we have of his other music in his life when we hear it?
I think there's definitely an element of that. I think it's from that perspective, it will always get something of a free pass, if you like, from fans. I mean, they're gonna like pretty much whatever he brings out to some degree or another.
You get at least the patience and attention of a careful listen, right?
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
exactly.
like if Aaron Sorkin is writing a new TV show or a new movie, I go in.
Go watch it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna watch it. You know, and other people may not like it, but I'm gonna tell you, it would have to be absolutely horrible for me not to find something in it.
Yeah.
You know, I like Studio 60. I like Newsroom. I'm an Aaron Sorkin fan.
Yeah.
I do picture let's just pick an age at random, some 19-year-old college student going, "Hey, I've heard about this Bruce Springsteen. Let me pick up Western Stars and see. I hear this guy's a rocker." And then put this in, go, "Wait a minute, is this
my grandparents' music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I think they would say, don't you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. On the other hand, I also think what I picture in my head, which would be amazing, is that 19-year-old kid who picks up Western Stars, thinks, "Oh, this is quite, I quite like this.
Yeah.
Let's go and see what else he's released." And it's just like, "Oh my God, are you in for a treat?" If you think Western Stars is good, just hang on to your hat.
Yeah.
It would be. I think it'd be interesting. Particularly, I mean, this is one that's interested me for a while actually, because from speaking to Rob and JB, who do Springsteen Sings the Alphabet, they are relatively new Springsteen fans. I mean, they came from like Magic, basically. I think JB was Wrecking Ball was his first album. And they've then gone back and listened to the early stuff. Now, Magic is potentially one of my least favorite Springsteen albums. That's Springsteen's on a hell of a scale, it's
sure. I mean,
but it's not one that really grabs me. But Rob and JB love very much the same songs that I do.
Yeah.
And I was a fan from Greetings from Asbury Park. So you can be surprised sometimes, I think, by what people get, and that's the thing. It's very easy to presume what other people are getting from it. You kind of think they're listening to it in the same way that you do, but then everyone listens to it in their own way, and everyone takes their own thing from it. It's very easy to fall into a trap of assuming that everyone hears the same thing.
Yep. I always offend people when I tell fans that my least favorite Springsteen album is Darkness. And I love the songs. I love some of the songs I love, but as an album, it's too much. It just doesn't do as much for me.
I am so glad you say that, because I was thinking the same thing when I rank. And now if I'm ranking the albums, I think someone just did that on Twitter, and I thought about it. I wouldn't put it bottom, but it isn't an album that I go to over and over again. Though individual songs I love.
Yeah.
So once again, to talk about another podcast, this Rock in the Suburbs, as they did Bruce Springsteen week, they had Jim and Patrick, who are the two hosts, their friend Mike, who's a huge Springsteen fan, and then intern Sam, who is he just graduated college, and he has been their intern, and he, self-serving, went and bought Darkness after I was on their show. He said, he gives me credit. He says, Jesse was so excited about Bruce Springsteen. I saw Darkness available on album. I picked it up and became a fan. And so hearing his perspective of like when he put on Nebraska, he's like, what is this? And I shared the story that right out of high school in 1977, I discovered the Beach Boys. I picked up an 8-track of called Endless Summer, which was a collection of a lot of their surf hits and other stuff. Great 8-track, still one of my favorites. I have the CD, and when it's summer, we'll put it on. So I'm going through and buying every Beach Boy cassette, 8-track I can find, because I discovered this new band, in 77. And then when I got to Pet Sounds, I went, what is this? This doesn't sound like anything else. There's songs without words on this. What is this? And I kind of set it aside. And then later, and then now it's one of my top albums. But my mind wasn't in the place to hear this. So I think that could be someone new might have the same feeling of Western Stars, while we haven't developed a taste. Our palate is Bruce Springsteen ready. So we're like, okay, let's see what nuances and flavors as I take this music in. Similar, like if you develop your palate for bourbon or Scotch, if you aren't used to it, it comes out. It's just its fireness. But once you develop a taste, you do. When you're smelling it and tasting all the different flavors that the wood has given it. Or am I overcomplicating it?
No, you're not. It's Bruce's music ages well. And I don't mean necessarily just holds up like over time, because it does, but it's just it over time, I think you notice more nuance, and it takes on more resonance because you also place it in context with the body of his work. And the other thing I've been thinking about lately is, it's just, if you go back and you look at the themes, right, and even listen to some of the ways we've described the music and the tone of the vocals, it's like he is aging, and those themes are reflected a lot overtly and sort of implicitly in the stories that he tells in the lyrics. And being on the upper end age-wise of fandom now, right? Is like, I wonder if I get more out of it as I age, being sort of keeping pace. I mean, Bruce has got some time on me, but still, it's like working on a Dream, for example, has become one of my favorite albums over time. It steadily increases because I appreciate and understand more of the theme of aging of that entire record as it starts to sink in on me as I'm aging, than I did at the time that it was released, 10 years ago. So, and I wonder, like with this album, if younger fans, the 19-year-old, would kind of just sort of get the world weariness of it.
Right. And then kind of grow into it. What Ken, I think you bring up a good point that I cannot remember who said this, but someone on the podcast mentioned you can't appreciate Tone of Love till you've had your heart broken a couple of times.
Yeah.
And
I believe it.
And while luckily I've been married 35 years, Linda and I, as I joke, 33 of them, the happiest years of our lives. Because we've certainly had our bumps in the road, but I haven't had my heart broke that often, but I've seen the wear and tear a relationship can have on you. And if you aren't diligent, if you aren't working on it, if you aren't sharing that, putting each other first at times, the relationship can deteriorate. So that's why it's one of my favorite albums. It would make my top 5. And I understand all its flaws, but I think, me personally, Springsteen comes down to a personal connection. The song speaks to me or they don't. And to bring it back to Western Stars, I don't know if it speaks to me yet, and I set that rule up very early. This is just first impressions, initial thoughts, but I want to know more about these characters. It is a book that I've just started, and I'm really looking forward to doing more of a deep dive to get to know these characters and these stories.
That's a good approach to take.
Yeah,
Thanks for bringing it back to the album too, because we had drifted pretty far afield. Hey, can we talk for a minute about talking about deep dive? Can we talk about Sleepy Joe's Cafe for a minute?
I love Sleepy Joe
because if you want to talk about going deep in that song, that like I hear. So if Drive Fast is sort of the most distinct and unique song on the album, Sleepy Joe's Cafe, I hear so many other Springsteen songs in it that I almost feel like it had to be a deliberate attempt to let's see how many quotes and references and things I can.
It strikes me a little bit of reminds me a little bit of Tweeter and the Monkey Man by the Traveling Wilburys.
Exactly. It's like everywhere, right from the first line, right?
Yeah.
There's the first line is like a reference to Rosalita, right? It's sort of parallel to it. If you go down towards the end, you can sort of see echoes of Highway Patrolman. If you look at the last verse, Saturday night, the lights are bright as the folks pouring from town. Joe keeps the blues playing. That whole Saturday night and the blues, that rhymes with tougher than the rest.
Yeah.
There's a million miles away from Secret Garden. There's the bridge. If you go back and listen to the bridge, and then listen to I'm a Rocker.
Yeah,
they're the same basically.
Yeah.
Like
he's always he's covering himself.
Yeah, it's like it's everywhere through the song, and it just makes me like I'm like this has to be intentional.
Yeah. For the longest time, my buddy Sam, when we were going to a show during I think it was the Magic tour, I said, "What are you wanting to hear?" And he said, "If I could hear anything from Ghost of Tom Joad, I'd be happy." And they ended up doing Ghost of Tom Joad. And that's the E Street Band song that gets played from that album most, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could see Sleepy Joe Cafe is going to be when someone says play something for Western Stars. This would be a song that could be similar to Mary's Place, similar to Open All Night, like when the Seeker Band did it. This rocking band song of just joy, and it's everything in there. It's live music. A marriage is a partnership. There is that it's, at 5 o'clock, so it gives me a little bit of out in the street.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. I love that song. I think it's, and I read somewhere, a couple of critics have said that they think it's one of the weakest songs on the album because it is kind of a copy of a copy of a copy. I don't feel like it is a copy of a copy. I just think it's a new take on similar themes.
Yeah, I kind of would have to agree with the critics on that one. I mean, it's the one song on the album that doesn't really do anything for me other than just make me notice all the references. And maybe I just need to listen to it a few more. And I do think, by the way, it is a highly likely candidate for an E Street Band tour, and I suspect that it will expand, right, and take on more life in concert. So my mind is open on that. But as I listen to it, it's kind of I have to admit I've heard the album a couple times through, and the last time through I kind of just skipped past that one. So but I did.
Nothing wrong with that. I could picture the band expanding a lot more instrumentals. Between choruses. Everyone having a chance. I definitely see Susie doing a little violin, Charlie doing maybe the accordion. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think Tucson Train is a pretty strong likelihood for an E Street Band version too.
Yeah, although this is a very minor point. I don't know whether this is picked out for you. Tucson Train, the chorus, it really stood out for me that he's it sounds like I'm nitpicking. He's almost got like one too many words in there. It's like he's racing to get to the end of the line.
I
My
like
baby's
that.
coming in on the Tucson
Yeah,
train.
it's the in that
Yeah.
that it was just like it's a weird cadence, but I like it actually. It's the first couple times I sang along, I was singing along wrong to it, and I'm like, why am I off the beat of this thing? And then I would listen, I'm like, oh, because there's that in that's in
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
Yeah, and like I always have the nitpicking on the wrestler. Have you ever seen a one-legged dog? I'm like, a one-legged dog can't move. What? No, what?
Yeah.
I mean, a three-legged
Three-legged
dog
dog.
maybe, but one-legged, they would just sit there.
well, there's also living in the future, right, with the barrel of a pistol spinning around.
Yeah, exactly.
Barrels don't spin. it's he's not always the
Right,
sometimes it's more the impression of what you're trying to convey
right.
than
So,
the actual
yeah,
accuracy of the imagery. So
hand wave is what we call it when we're
Yeah.
talking. When I do TV show podcasts, we talk about and a hand wave. You're like, wait a minute, this doesn't.
Yeah. Just let it
yeah.
go.
Yeah. Now I do agree. I really liked Hello Sunshine. The next one, I'm drawing a blank.
There goes my miracle.
Yeah, was
Yeah.
okay. I didn't dislike it. It was good. And then I love Tucson Train.
Mhm.
And I think maybe it's just I love the video of the full band. I
Yeah.
love him performing it. And I love the earnestness of the song that I screwed up. I know I screwed up.
Yeah.
And I've gone off to redeem myself.
Yeah.
And now then I've begged, I've pleaded, just come for a weekend.
Yeah.
Just come for a weekend. You aren't making any promises. We aren't, you're not committing anything. Just come for a weekend and let's see what we can do. And she said yes. And that joy the protagonist is saying is, I was a lousy guy. I've messed up, but I'm going to show her a man can change. It is such a hopeful song.
It is, and what a fascinating bookend to his other train song.
Yes.
Think about that. Downbound Train
Yeah.
compared with Tucson Train, right?
Yes.
It's the I screwed up and now all is lost.
Right? Yeah,
To,
absolutely. Yeah.
I screwed up and there's hope.
And
Yeah. And I'm gonna fix this.
Yeah, and it is a very hopeful song, and the romantic in me thinks that it goes well that weekend, and then they try another weekend, and ultimately, they're back together. But it's perfect us not knowing that.
Yeah.
It just is setting the persona. That is great.
I had to wonder when I was listening to it if Bruce was like, is this all subconscious, or is there part of his head going like, yeah, every time I sing Downbound Train, I'll just wish that character could have another shot and have that in his mind. Like they're so similar, those two songs.
So
but with different
that's
outcomes.
a great question. We should get a list of questions that we should ask Bruce if he's ever on the podcast. The other point is, someone brought up racing in the street. She sits on her daddy's porch. Is that the same porch as Thunder Road, where she crosses the porch while the radio plays? Is that the same porch?
Is there a Springsteen verse out there?
Yeah. And is that, that's kind of an unofficial sequel to Thunder Road that, they got together, but there's still, things did not go as well as they thought. It's just a curious thought of that. Or just porch is something that happens a lot of things. And so it doesn't mean any connection at all.
Yeah. And sometimes I suspect even as the songwriter, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't really know where these things come from. They kind of come out of nowhere.
He talked a little bit of that in Storytellers, right? He said, but I was feeling it. The other story I love is, I was reading years ago, a science fiction writer named Isaac Asimov. Prolific writer, great, written,
one of my favorites
books. Yes. And, he was presenting a lecture, and he said what the story meant. And a member in the audience said, no, that isn't what it means at all, and corrected him. And, Dr. Asimov said, I'm the guy who wrote it. And the audience member said, why do you think just because you wrote it,
you know what it's about?
And Asimov said he was right.
Mhm.
And I now never assume.
Yeah.
I know what I meant for it to be, but
Yeah.
that isn't necessarily what my reader got out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful story about the power of art.
Well, there's another way to look at it too, right? There's what you mean to convey as the artist. There's what the listener or the reader or the viewer takes away from it. But then there's a third piece of it, which is what your subconscious was trying to work through as well, that you weren't intending to convey,
right?
But is actually there underneath. And I suspect that's there at times in Bruce's work too, actually. So.
And actually, a lot of those things can change. Like you were saying before about, the feeling you have about an album changes over time because you change. And I think as an artist as well, some artists will look back on their earlier work and look at it differently than they did at the time. And that will maybe then influence them. They're almost influencing themselves then.
Yeah, like when you think about No Surrender, initially it's just this fun pop song about friendship, not liking school, this whole thing. But as I've talked to people on the podcast that have fought medical issues and my own very minor cancer scare, No Retreat, No Surrender became an anthem to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a song about perseverance and brotherhood supporting you during tough times. It's the same song. It's just my life experience has changed how I think about it. Okay, we I hope you two have had fun. This
Absolutely.
I think I'm going to try to do these in the future just to see, and just kind of fun just to get a couple of people on and just no particular agenda, just visit. We're going to wrap it up soon. James, do you have any final thoughts?
Just that I think this one's going to be a grower. I think immediately on listening to it, I liked it, but I know I'm going to need to listen to it a few more times to really get in there. More so than it did when I remember when I first heard, I think it was Magic or Working on a Dream, I can't remember, and I thought, no, I'm not sure about this. Yeah. And I have come to like both those albums, but this did grab me and did make me think, because it's such, like I say, it's almost like a concept album. It reminds me a little bit, not in tone obviously, but in the overall picture, if you like, of Green Day's American Idiot, which has been made into like a musical. And I could almost see that happening with this. It feels like there's this narrative running through it. You've got all these characters that you could almost see them, like you said, it's almost like a collection of short stories. You could almost see them appearing together in this universe that's connected.
Isn't there already a show, Smokey Joe Cafe? It's I think a songwriter, so I'll have to look that up. But yes, I could see this being a Billy Joel had Moving On, Mamma Mia. The Beach Boys had a short one that was based on the Beach Boy music. So this would make an interesting film or Broadway, and kind of using this as the soundtrack and basis. I think that would be great. Ken, how about you?
It is immediately one of my favorite Springsteen albums. I wouldn't even know how to do a ranking of it yet, but I mean it's up there. It's certainly one of the albums I most enjoyed just listening to. I love the musicality of it. I love the production of it. Thank you, Bruce, for just making it so pleasant, soothing. I don't mean soothing in a boring way, but I mean just in a pleasant on the ears way. It's just very, like I said earlier, it's contemplative, and so I feel like I need to let those songs sit and listen and really kind of get inside them a bit. But there are certainly some songs that have grabbed me initially, and then the other thing I'd say is it is a driving record. It is an awesome record to listen to. I've only had a chance to re-listen to it while sitting in traffic. I'm doing a road trip this summer with my wife, and I'm really just looking forward to just getting out on an open road and just letting it just like fill the space and fill the sky and just kind of like feeling it.
Yeah. Several years ago, Brian Wilson went back and took the original Smile tapes and did a new version. His version of what the Smile album would have been, and it is one of those where I don't pick individual songs. When I'm ready to listen to it, I start the beginning and I go all the way through the end. I feel like I'm going to do this with this album a lot.
Yeah.
Not just, and certainly I'm in the mood to hear Tucson Train, but I think more often than not, I'm going to want to just start with The Hitchhiker and go all the way through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect. Ken, if someone wants to reach you, how can they?
Best way to reach me is to come to my blog, eastreetshuffle.com. I post there every day, kind of a this day in Springsteen history post and an essay about a particular song or cover, and I'm sure Western Stars will make its way into the mix sometime soon. But would love to have new readers and your feedback. So thanks.
And so Ken and I are trying to work out our schedule so we can come back because you've reached a whole year of doing this, which is after doing 40 Days of Springsteen, which ended up being 47 episodes in a row, which was a labor of love. I went, 47 is a lot. So I can only imagine 365.
Yeah, I'm at like 520, 30 some days at this point of like every single day publishing. It's a little bit like a marathon that never ends. So.
Yeah. And you've got to keep thinking, did new things happen on this day?
Yeah.
Like June 14th next year, you'll have to add that Western Stars was released.
I've got it in my little tracking spreadsheet.
Very nice.
When we talk, I can take you and sort of decide all the sources that I use to keep this stuff straight. So,
and your Twitter handle?
At K Rosen.
All right, please go to his blog. It is wonderful, and there are times. First off, he finds amazing covers of people doing Bruce's songs or Bruce doing other people's songs, and then when you decide to take apart a song, it is always fascinating and entertaining. So, love the website. James, how about you?
Well, mine far less interesting. So, Twitter at Annalidworm. But all you'll get is a stream of me quoting Springsteen and other random lyrics and agonizing with people about how rubbish things are generally. I'm much more your typical Twitter user. I don't produce anything useful, I'm afraid.
Well, I like reading yours. Both Ken and James have been on the podcast before. So if you haven't heard their episode, you should go check it back. You can do a Google search and it'll pop up on your feed. I am Jesse Jackson. I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter. The show is at SetListingBruce on Twitter. You can email us at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. I have couple of interesting episodes coming up in the future. At least I think they're interesting. Always love sharing everyone's Springsteen story. The latest episode I had was Lisa Cohn, who, if you haven't heard that episode, you really should. Her elevator pitch is the best seat I had in Madison Square Garden was watching my mother get married with 100 other people at a Mooney's ceremony. And the best cocaine she ever had was the judge who was friends of her father gave it to her in her father's living room. It is
fascinating.
It is. She wrote a book, and her mother joined the Moonies, and and her father was this very liberal. They both were 60s hippies, and they talk about the childhood and how her and her brother kind of survived. It's a very hopeful story, yet there are points where and so she talked about how much she loved Bruce Springsteen. So that's a great episode. And so I'm hoping to get some others. Hey, James, Ken, thank you for joining. I was worried I'd set this up and no one would come. So
Okay.
I am double happy, that I got such two of my favorite people to join me and talk about this great album. Listeners, thank you. I hope you enjoy this podcast. And like I said, reach out. Let us know what you think of Western Stars. And for now, take care. And for those of you watching live, happy Father's Day.
Thanks.